how are you feeling about like looking for bottoms? If I recall, last time you were on, we were talking maybe 10K bottom on BTC.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so I was going to say, so it's still kind of in that realm, and I think the more I calculate it out, it's looking closer to 9,000 ish. But the bottom line is, and I always like to put the positive. I'm a positive guy. I like to put the positive spin. The FTX fiasco is probably the beginning of the end of the move down, meaning that, yes, there's more downside, but this is that final flush out that we'll see. The thought process behind 9,000 is becoming clearer. I did a lot of recent technical work comparing history of Lehman Brothers and the collapse in 08 and how long it took the S&P to bottom, which was about 5 to 6 months. And then looking at the percentage drop in the S&P 500 from Lehman Brothers to when it bottomed in early 09. And really what it was is it was about 45% drop in the S&P, 5 to 6 months is what it took. So it gives us a basis to look at it. And a lot of people say, well, is a bank like Lehman Brothers like FTX? And the answer is they are very similar. I mean, in terms of, loaning out money and leverage, banks that overextended themselves with leverage in 08. I mean, that was one of the big issues with the crisis, is that they were giving out so much free money and just so much in bad loans that it came back to bite them. They had derivatives, which were loans upon, a derivative. The best way to explain a derivative is like, here's a baseball bat, and then a derivative would be a picture of a sliver of the bat. It's like a multiple offshoot of it, right?
Yeah, it's terrible.
So the bottom line is that there's a lot of similarities there. And one of the things that I've learned in the 20 years of trading is that human emotion doesn't change, which is why history tends to generally repeat, if not rhyme. And so the greed and fear aspects are the same. Doesn't matter if it was the dot-com bubble, the tulip mania of the 1500s, where a tulip bulb could buy you a whole house, a mansion, in fact. You just see these things repeat over and over and over again. In terms of the chart, one of the things that I love showing, and this is actually new, I've never shown this before, but if you look at the Terra Luna collapse, Bitcoin was trading at around 31,500. And collapsed down in about a week down to 17.7-ish, right? So that was about a, not quite 50%, but we'll call it 40% drop in Bitcoin. Now, if you look at FTX, which by itself is probably a little bit of a greater shock to the market, the drop in Bitcoin went from like 21,000 to about 15 and change, which is only about a 25% drop. And what why I bring that up is that it basically shows us that the market is adapting and buyers are starting to say, okay, yeah, that's bad, but it's getting to that point where there's not that many people that are looking to dump anymore, and the price action is not getting as negative as it was. Like if we saw this collapse be 60%, then that's scary, right? Then you're seeing bigger swells of price drop based on the news, but it's actually the opposite. So again, I think to me, yeah, there's some more downside. You're going to have forced liquidations of a lot of balance sheets that have a lot of coins on them. We know Solana, FTX has a ton of Solana and some other stuff. So there's going to be pressure. In addition, I think that, you have a lot of these institutions that were interested in investing in Bitcoin. They were already a little nervous. Now with FTX, forget about it. They're like, all right, we're waiting until we get regulation before we even go near this space. So it takes a lot of those buyers out, which means that there's going to be kind of this, open area where you could fall a little bit lower, but it's getting there. And that's exciting to me because I've been waiting since 69,000 to start buying and accumulating. And I'm finally starting to kind of nibble a little bit as we go lower.
Interesting. So, and I think you were absolutely right. Looking at the TA, I was calling the top about a year ago myself. And saying, hey, bottom just based on the TA looks like it'll probably be 10K, 9K, something else in that ballpark. I always say I'm not a sniper, but I'm pretty good with a shotgun. So nice. I imagine that's what you mean by starting to take a nibble. That hey, maybe we're hitting that trough where things might be bottoming out. I'm curious if you've what other fundamentals? Now, I like your point about the fact that 50% drop after the Terra Luna collapse, now maybe only 25% drop on FTX, which was arguably a larger problem in the sector. But what if my problem here right now is all the uncertainty around like Tether and some of the other liabilities going on in the Bahamas, and Like I think a lot of these things are more largely interconnected than people might be aware.
Yeah.
And it seems like CZ at Binance and things is trying to play a little bit like, okay, that was the worst of it. Things are going to be okay. Here I'm going to professionalize this industry. So be a Binance customer. It seems like is the signal he's giving out. How do you play any of that? Or I mean, do you care? Are you literally just playing the chart first?
Yeah. So for me, there's definitely like one eye open to what's going on with the stable coins and how interconnected it is. For me, it's really kind of looking at the uproar around FTX and the politicians starting to kind of say, okay, we got to get some stuff out there. I think there's even more pressure on the SEC to kind of give a framework for the regulation. And as much as we don't want over-regulation, we worry about over-regulation stifling growth, it's a matter of what's the worst case scenario. What's worse, right? Is it worse to have someone basically just mismanage your fund and it disappears, whatever you had on the exchange? Or is it better to have, these regulations that at least make these companies or make these coins file certain paperwork where you know what the heck is going on behind the scenes? And so I think it's the lesser of two evils. And that's where I'm kind of angling. It's like, so for me, it's like that longer term view where I'm being very careful about which coins I accumulate in this period as we go lower. So I'm sticking with kind of the big players, the Bitcoins, the Ethereums, but then also just looking at it and saying, okay, if there is another shoe to drop, how low could it go? Making sure I don't over allocate capital where,
Right.
If you have $1 million, you should never be putting $1 million into crypto or even $1 million into Bitcoin, right? It should be, maybe 10%. And this way, if something tragic does happen like that, it's not the end of the world. It's a setback, but it's not the end of the world.
No, that makes sense. And so when you look at markets. Here's a good question. Put it back up, Alex. So Mort asking, what indication says BTC will climb again? Is this just speculation? Like what here indicates to you like that this is definitely a cycle and that it will definitely come back? Now, I know we have 14-ish years of history on these things, but I think there's a lot of fundamentals out there. Even just the simple, we've only seen Bitcoin in a quantitative easing environment until the last year or so. And so now we're in a QT period. How does the macroeconomics, like, why should we assume that the cycle will just play out the way that it's played out before? Because there are so many different fundamentals today.
Yeah, and I think we have to be ready for the cycle to be slightly elongated, right? So if you look at the 2017 high, it bottomed essentially 1 year. It was about 12 to 13 months later. Yeah. In this cycle, we're already a year in, and I still think there's at least another 5-6 months out. And the whole idea there, the fundamentals make sense because, like you mentioned, the Fed was printing money in all those previous bear markets, so it got us out faster. So you have to think that this one will last a little bit longer. This one could be a little bit deeper. So there's always that chance it goes lower. For me, in terms of why do I think it will rise again like the Phoenix, right? It's more so that you look at the big picture, and there's this fundamental need in mankind for trust, for knowing that there's something that's kind of a store of value, which, by the way, was gold for thousands and thousands. I mean, you go back 5,000 years, gold has always been that. But I think there's this need now in this technology-driven economy where we need something that's digitized, right? Where you can send it very, very quickly back and forth, but it's also a store of safety. So for me, it's saying, sure, the Fed turned off the printing presses for now, but when we get in a depression or a really bad recession and inflation, maybe the inflation's not to 2%, but if you have 4% inflation and let's say unemployment goes to 25%, which would be on par with like the Great Depression, you can't tell me they're not going to be like, oh my God, we need to print money again to save, bring us out of this depression. And so, people fundamentally want something that they can say, okay, even if they go to print, I can store my money and keep my value in this. And so for me, that's kind of the driving force behind it. I love the fact that there's been so much big adoption. Granted, it's still in the infancy, but I mean, you have Mike Novogratz, you have, Kevin O'Leary. I mean, you have billionaires and multiple hundred millionaires adapting to this technology. And you also have the blockchain starting to take over more and more with like companies like Microsoft buying out certain other companies where they're getting involved. And so it does tell me that this is a long-term project that should survive, but by no means, I mean, 9,000 is my low, could go a lot lower before it doesn't. And again, the way you mitigate that, by the way, and again, it's a great question of like, is there a chance that Bitcoin doesn't survive like the tulip mania of 1500? Yes, there is. And the way you mitigate that, just like any investment, is by allocating the proper amount, where if it doesn't, it sucks, but it's not, it shouldn't break you.
Sure. Yeah. No, and speaking of Mike Novogratz, I don't know if he's gotten his Terra Luna tattoo lasered off yet, but it's got to be coming. He's got to sell that as an NFT at some point.
Seriously.
Are you? So I know you do stocks and other things as well. What do you put into something like your blockchain related investments relative to other things? Are you heavy in the space, or are you sitting in a lot of conservative investments, or even in this climate? I think it's been, hey, what's been better than the U.S. dollar really for the whole last year? What do your percentages look like and things like that?
Yeah, so I have a small percentage of my overall liquid net worth in Bitcoin, a couple other ones just more as swing trades. The Bitcoin holding I'm willing to hold for a little bit longer, but sure. I would consider it about a 1/6 position of what I intend to accumulate over the longer period, over the next 6 months. And then aside from that, I do have gold holdings. Some silver in there too, which, silver and gold have held up amazingly well comparatively to Bitcoin in the stock market. Sure. And then again, for me, it's in and out of stocks more quickly right now, as I do think that there's a bear market in the economy and we're going to see a recession. So those are my biggest ones overall. And I think, for me, it's like you said, the dollar has been amazing. I do think the dollar will continue to kind of weaken a little bit in the near term. So I continue to like gold and silver and the metals. By no means does that mean that Bitcoin's not going to grow in my portfolio. Like I said, when it finally reaches bottom, I actually think that becomes one of the best stores of safety with gold going forward.
Interesting. So let's look at some more charts. I know you had Ethereum pulled up. I would guess that you would probably pay attention to the ETH chart and the BTC chart generally for market sentiment, given that they're combined 90+% of the total market liquidity for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the ETH chart, and one of the things you can see, this little kind of like 45-degree angle I put in yesterday. Mm-hmm. And what I was doing is I was teaching how when you have a move up like this, what they consider to be a bull flag, or in spirit of bull flag, it's either a right angle or down to about a 45-degree angle. So yesterday I was showing people how even with the little sell-off yesterday, mm-hmm. it was still within that 45-degree angle, which made it more bullish. And you could see today price making a move up. Now it's testing this high. Can ETH break out? If it breaks out, you could have a little bit of short-term upside here in Ethereum. So it's not a bad chart. It still has a bullish pattern, and it's starting to react. We'll have to see if it's able to break out. But you're right. I mean, ETH is definitely one to keep an eye on. If Bitcoin does go to 9,000, eventually ETH will break down and probably take out this low here. But same thing, I'll be an accumulator once that happens in the charts. But the other thing to look at here is you have this long-term trend line, right? So if you're someone who's looking for maybe the next bull market to start in ETH, you would want to see this long-term trend line going back to the highs, the all-time highs. You want to see price start trading and holding above there. And then that would be a very nice signal to tell you that downward trend line has broken.
No, for sure. So, and as far as markets go, it's funny, BSV, we're a big BSV advocacy show. BSV has actually outperformed the bear market typically, which it underperformed the bull market. And everybody says, these poor BSV people are all poor now. But it's actually, so over the last few days, Bitfinex, which is one of the larger margin trading firms, and then they're connected to some of the OTC desks that do a lot of the quiet leverage trading and market making for other exchanges. Well, they've closed BSV margin trading, and we see the response to it as these shorts closing this massive large wick, but also starting to sort of play counter to the overall market sentiment. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. What do you think of the BSV chart at this point? And maybe both BSV USD and BSV BTC, because they are a bit correlated.
Yeah, so here's the BSV US dollar chart, and you're right. I mean, that pop, I just looked at it today. What a pop yesterday. A couple things interesting on that. Number one is it does bring up an intriguing point that if the government does regulate, I mean, here in this case, it was an exchange, or I'm not sure exactly what you said, but it was they started to limit the leverage, right? And so shorts had to cover. And essentially the concept there that it made me jump to is that if we do get regulation, what if the regulation says exchanges can only offer 2-to-1 margin, right? Or double your margin? Could there potentially be short covering that is forced that way? And maybe that's another, I mean, you see what happened here on BSV, what a move up. Interestingly enough, on the chart, look at where BSV stopped, right? And I love doing this as a chart guy,
right at resistance,
right there, right? Pivot high, major pop, and it stopped on a dime right there, and then pulled back. So I think that's very cool to see. And again, like you were saying earlier, is that BSV underperformed when Bitcoin was going nuts, but now it's actually overperformed. And if we look at that Bitcoin BSV and we compare those charts, you can clearly see. So it was an underperformed. Bitcoin's above, and then you flipped down here, and it's now Bitcoin's been an underperformer while this has started to uptick a little bit. And I think that's fascinating because, it makes you wonder is do you have a safer crypto even than Bitcoin here? I mean, again, I might be jumping to conclusions, but it's kind of an intriguing aspect because it's like, think about it. In a bull market, gold usually underperforms, but in a bear market, it overperforms. So is your BSV your gold standard for Bitcoin? I mean, I'm just throwing that out there.
I'll take it, man. Let's make it a sound clip. So we were talking a little bit about other fundamentals. What do you think of things like the US dollar relative to other currencies? I mean, we saw the British pound, for example, had outperformed the dollar for quite a long time, and they've now come nearer to parity and those kind of things. Like, how do you, well, I see you have the index here. Do you only play the index, or do you pick other individual currencies you like to weigh it against, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I definitely pay attention to other pairs, right? But in terms of the DXY itself, what's fascinating about this, and I'll just show you guys a couple trend lines here, is so when you were up here, there was so much bullish bias. I mean, everyone was just screaming that the dollar was the big thing. But look at what you had here. All right, so what you can see here, and why I love drawing trend lines, is that here you started it, and at that high, look at the pullback. Then you hit it here, look at the pullback, and then here and look at the pullback. So what you can gather is that, again, sometimes you have to, as an investor, ignore the kind of the buzz and the kind of the yelling of people saying something. It's very easy for us to get caught up in that hysteria. But in reality, the charts are like the purest form of honesty. And here you very clearly saw that, all right, well, we should have some sort of pullback in the dollar. It did there, and it actually turned out to be a bigger drop. Interestingly enough, you can see very clearly here's a trend line, and you can see why the dollar is catching a little bit of a bid off of this line. Now, going to the pairs trade, like GB, the British pound, right? So GBP USD, let me just bring up that one here. Interestingly enough, look at this. So I had these trend lines. I was doing a private consulting over the weekend, and we talked about this. And you could see how this line here, look at how it goes right through these lows. And then look at the bounce on the pound right there, and then look at the pullback starting. So again, it's awesome. I mean, this is what I live for, is this kind of stuff. And the same thing here. You can see the panic. I remember when the pound was collapsing. This is right around when the new prime minister was getting in there and all that. And panic is usually a buying opportunity, right? When you see that fear reach a maximum. And by the way, it's one of the reasons why I don't think Bitcoin's quite bottomed yet, is we haven't fully seen that panic washout that we usually see in bear markets.
Sure.
So I think if you did pierce 10,000 on Bitcoin, I think there's a lot of people that would panic a little bit if we start breaking 10K, and I think that could be an interesting thing. So that's kind of an interesting chart. And then like the euro US dollar here, you could see how, again, you basically bottomed just below $1, and then you had this interesting trend line where you kept on hammering, and every time you hit it, you pulled back until finally it broke out. Sure. And that's the trigger for what you start to watch for. Now, on a technical basis, I'm gonna show you guys how I trade this. Like, I'm never someone that once it breaks out, I don't chase the buy. That to me is like a cardinal sin of trading, where it's already rallied up. Like if you look 1, 2, 3, and then up here. So I'm paying up too much at that point. So what I do is I look for the retrace to what I call the scene of the crime. And the scene of the crime very clearly is this level right here. So notice how this was the line where it couldn't get through, and it finally got through. And then where does it go? Right back to that line. That's where you want to buy right here. and then ultimately look at the price action there. So I mean, that's just some tidbits on technical
Sure.
analysis that I love to do. And
I love that pattern too. I call it the breakout retest pattern, and that's where you buy. But I'll tell you what, man, I'd be terrified. That candle closed pretty hard, red underneath there. I'd be real close to like stopping myself out, frankly.
I know. I'll let you in on a secret that I use. It's called the confirmation signal. And basically the confirmation signal is so what ends up happening in trading is that there's a lot of algos that know these levels, and they tend to push price below to try to scare people out, or above to try to stop them out as well. And so what I look for is I look for 2 consecutive higher closes, right? So here you closed above the line. Even there, I wouldn't trust the breakout because you know, it's just, there's too many games where they're trying to lure people in. But once you get a second close higher than that first candle, it's very hard for the algos to force the market to really reverse quickly. And so what I do is when we're retracing back, I say, okay, so same thing now. If they close it below, they could be just trying to whip out the weak hands. Let's see if it confirms. And in this case, it just had one close below and then ripped back up. So it never confirmed. And so the little tidbits like that kind of keep you in the trade. But you're right. I mean, it's scary when they bring it back in like that.
No, that's good stuff. Also, on your back at the British pound chart versus US dollar, it looks to me like it's rejecting at that at where it's at now. What do you, if you had to guess now, and I would say it's a little bit unclear, it looks like it wants to bounce down off that resistance, but what do you think? How are you seeing it?
Yeah, so I'm in that camp that in the short term, this is significant resistance. One of the reasons why it's significant is because you have multiple trend lines. So anytime you have, so you have one trend line that is flat, and then if I go to my weekly chart, you can see this longer term trend line from here to here, and it goes right to there. And so anytime you have 2 technical trend lines kind of converging, there's going to be major resistance there. And in all fairness, if you look at the run that the pounds had, it went from $1.03 to basically $1.21. Percentage-wise, that's a big move in the near term. It should pull back.
Overbought.
So for me, basically what I would say is, you know, it may be in the beginnings of a new bullish move, but you got to let it pull back. For me, it would probably be a pullback to like this trend line here. You connect these lows, maybe this one here could be an opportunity, but somewhere in this vicinity is where we should see the pound pull back to.
Interesting. Well, very cool. We got about 2.5 minutes left. I think you had a hard stop at the half hour. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover here? Any big ideas inside of 2 minutes here?
Yeah, I mean, I think just looking at the overall market, you know, we're in this period where the Fed now looks like they might be starting to kind of not go as crazy with 75 basis points. I think on December 14th, we have the next Fed decision. And so I think right now the markets are kind of getting giddy. They're like, oh, yay, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think what we need to realize is that they're still going to be hiking, and they're definitely not going to be cutting rates. And so you have an economy that is strong right now. Like we saw incredible consumer spending over the Black Friday holiday and so forth. But there will be a point where all these rate hikes really filter into the economy. And so I think people should just be very careful, especially with stocks and the stock market. And I do think that we'll see a recession in 2023. So be careful out there. I think the beautiful thing about Bitcoin and crypto is that we will see the low probably in the first half of 2023. And I actually think that you'll get to a point where crypto starts, at least Bitcoin and maybe some of the others, it starts going up when the stock market goes down. We haven't seen that really. It's usually down together, up together. But I do think you'll see a flip in that kind of thesis there in 2023.
Interesting. Well, why? Now that we have 90 seconds left.